here, sort of some information, I think, over in here about potential changes in the precipitation pattern, which might mean, for example, same amount of precipitation annually, but coming in a different time frame. Instead of over 5 months, maybe over 3 months, maybe earlier, maybe later. And that obviously has an effect on both the supply. A shorter time frame means the flowing streams will fall off sooner, and also that the drier climate at that time will increase demand because people will start watering if that's what we're continuing to do. Irrigation would start happening sooner. So that's a kind of that's an issue of concern. The question of what is the impact of climate change, I can't answer these questions. I can tell you that these are potential issues that we're obviously going to be spending some time looking at and trying to understand. Okay, I'm moving out of the future supply side now. Uh-huh.
I don't see the probably increased frequency of drought out of the climate prediction here, because the annual precipitation totals are undetermined, the changes are undetermined, and precipitation variability, there are very small changes, under 10% detected, which are, so what is the...
So I think the increased variability in general is where you get, that's probably the bottom one, precipitation variability, expected 10% larger standard deviation than the historic reference period of 71 to 2000. So if you go back, Peter, to that thing that was on page 23, I think, and you look at a 10% increase or increased variability on this already variable, some issues that were okay will become higher, some that will become lower. There'll be more variability, which will undoubtedly result in a few instances at least of additional drought. So it's about the variability of the...
But the standard deviation is less than 10%. It's not 10%. So I'm just wondering, we're putting it prominently in the middle of our assumptions, but just want to make sure we understand this is really a very...
So I think that this is one of the areas that we will want to have Stratus and our consultant help us understand more about the impacts of this. I would say the one other thing, and actually it was Rick who got me to look at this document from some of his correspondence with Bill Teisling. This is the vulnerability assessment that was done at the university, and it's a 2011 timeframe. This has a good analysis of some of the impacts of variability from a water supply perspective as well. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not quite done with the vulnerability issues. I want to talk about the water supply, water quality implications, source characteristics. So we know that we have, and again, those of you who are on the tour know that we talked about bacteria, TOC, and total organic carbon and total trihalomethanes. Sludge removal and sand removal comes from the issues we're dealing with, I think, in our both our supplies and then in our treatment operations. So this chart is E. coli in the San Lorenzo River, one at Tate and one at Felton Diversion. And this one is total coliform bacteria, of which E. coli is a subset of this, again at Tate and at the Felton Diversion. And you can see that there's this big peak here. And I just wanted to point out where that came from. That peak is right there. It's the miracle March that happened in 2012. Where we'd had a really, really dry winter, and all of a sudden it started raining, and that peak of rain, that really introduction of rain, resulted in that peak of total coliform bacteria. You can also see that in terms of the component of E. coli in the system generally, it's quite variable, but as far as the background levels of this, pretty low, and then you saw that pretty impressive peak there. So I know that there's been some interest in the sort of water quality sort of parameters in general, and again, higher variability of flows. As you see here, we had this kind of a situation, and the year before we had that kind of a situation where it rained really a lot in the November, December timeframe and then dried out. These are quite different from a sort of a more normal cycle that we've seen historically. We talked a lot on the tours about total organic carbon, and it's as a precursor material for drinking water quality parameters of concern, particularly total trihalomethanes and haloacetic acids. And this chart gives you information about the characteristic of that particular TOC in the various sources. This is the best quality source, less than 1 milligram per liter of TOC, whereas the Loch Lomond is the worst from that point of view, and San Lorenzo varies depending on kind of the high flows and other things that are going on. I think this is a good thing. These slides came from Terry McKenney, who describes that total trihalomethanes of 24% of our supply. This would be an average level that you would see, and then you see that the river and the coast sources are smaller. And then
back up, but wait, I will have a question for you too.
I'm sorry, which one are you wanting to know?
Slide number 67.
Is that this one? So the total organic carbon is a precursor, and this is the formation potential of this. If you just were treating lake water, you would see total trihalomethanes in this range. The standard is 80. If you were just treating these sources over here, it's 70. So it's really, the lake is more challenging to treat from that perspective.
Rosemary, I have a question. I have actually several questions from Doug, and we'll get to them. But here's one that's on point now. So when will the city start testing for emerging contaminants in existing supply in order to establish a baseline?
I can't answer that question specifically, but I will tell you that I believe we've already done some testing, because the unregulated contaminant monitoring that EPA requires utilities to do includes all kinds of potential emerging contaminants of concern. So I would think we could talk to Hugh and find out what we specifically have been testing for.
So it looks like follow-up for you, Doug. Thanks, Rosemary.
Rick.
So it looks like there, when I'm trying to think about, well, why does the reservoir have more organic material in it? Is that algae growing there?
Well, it's algae, but it's also leaf, leaf droppings, and we used to have this in Bull Run where, the water would they'd get this sort of leaf fall in the fall particularly, and the drawn down reservoirs, and we'd get color in the water that would be different. But also with the color comes the things that are leaching out of the organic material is going into the lake. And it's different typically different in a reservoir kind of a setting than it is in a flowing stream, because they can accumulate in that setting. Okay, I think I'm finished now with the future supply. Any other questions on future supply before going ahead?
So I got the impression from going on the tour that because the trihalomethanes, disinfection byproducts are an issue for the city, and there's new regulations that the city has to meet, that there's a lot of trade-offs that happen in terms of how they do their operations. And part of the trade-off is kind of a loss of, like short-term emergency water supply. There's just not as much water storage of treated water as we used to have. And I'm wondering if you consider that an issue for this committee, since our charge is really about, a safe and reliable water source for the city. Should we be looking at emergency conditions such as, earthquakes that knock out power for a few days and that kind of thing?
I guess the answer to that question is, wow, the scope of what you've got to look at already is pretty big. But if you had extra time, that might be okay to look at.
I would add that not that long ago, the city reduced its supply of finished water in the Cardiff Place tank, reservoir that used to be there. And the reason for that was that the water standing there and not being used was
Right.
causing problems.
Yeah.
We had too much. We're storing too much of it in normal years. So
Yeah.
although it might help you in a disaster or emergency, we decided we wanted to keep less of that because we had to end up treating it a great deal more when we were storing it. So if we got into that, it would be a very messy additional thing. I think we have enough on our plate, would be my guess, but we'll see.
So I guess just a couple of other comments about this. I think I said this on the tour a couple of times, that the current philosophy about drinking water and drinking water treatment is it's used to just be treated and go out in the system, and you kept everything tip-top full, and you didn't want to take a chance that the operator might leave at the wrong time and the tank would drain, or that the big fire would happen. And now water is really treated as a perishable product that needs to be managed from the source to the tap. And really with the introduction of the lead and copper rule, which requires testing at people's kitchen tap for lead and copper, that was the first time that it had gone beyond, testing in your distribution system or at your treatment plant or at your sources. So I think that really one of the things that's happening with the change in the way demand is occurring is from the point of view of what we need for storage to meet the diurnal curves, which is what distribution storage is largely about, not entirely, but largely. Demand has changed, so that makes that amount that we need. That's why we can move from, say, a 35 million gallon storage in Bay Street to 6 million gallon storage. But the other big element is fire flow. And I can tell you that our people work very closely with the fire department to make sure that there is adequate fire flow coming not only from stored water, but also from the system. And one thing that can happen when, because the system is well interconnected, is that if you have a fire in a location and you're drawing off of the local storage and you need more, you can turn pumps on in other parts of the system and pump water into that zone to make sure that there's adequate flow for a fire. So,
Rosemary, how much proportionately? So it looks like you have 25 more slides.
right.
Does it?
Want to take a break?
Well, I'm going to ask you how much more you're able to absorb without having some processing. You're good? Well, would you do me a favor, just one little? Would you just do one little thing, which is turn to one other person and just talk for a few minutes about what were the most interesting pieces of the slideshow? It really will help. It's like burping, so you can eat more, all right? So all of you, turn to one other person and chat a little bit. Okay. Thank you for indulging. I should know that with this committee, once you get talking.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, let's get back to the presentation, and that will leave us some time for discussion. Thank you, everybody. Okay, Rosemary, whatever it is, it has to happen later.
The chart, the one that put everything on.
Well, apparently people have things on their mind. That's a good thing. Okay.
Yeah.
I know. It's Mike. Yeah, unless you have to stop talking unless you're typing with Mike Rotkin, in which case you get an extra allotment of time. No, Rosemary, thank you.
Go ahead.
Take it away.
This part of the presentation is probably the most sort of big chunks of it are existing information from the Urban Water Management Plan from 2010. And I suspect that as we go forward, we'll be having lots of conversations about what are the right assumptions to make as we go forward, et cetera. So major inputs are to the forecasting methodology we use include the population forecast from Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, growth in accounts based on each class of customers calculated based on population, water use and future development based on recent actual experience. The methodology comes from this document, the AWWA M50 Manual, Water Resources Planning. Price hasn't been formally factored into these projections, but obviously has an impact and needs to be considered over time. So this is more of the details, and there's a link down here that you can go to find this is, I think, Appendix I of the 2010 Interim Water Management Plan. The scenario I'm showing here is Scenario 2, which is the lower of the two, and it's the one I believe has been used for the Long-Term Conservation Master Plan work that's been done. This is a table 4.411 from the Urban Water Management Plan. It shows basically going from about 3.5 billion gallons to just over 4 billion gallons in this 20-year window between 2010 and 2030. This is the detail. It was specifically, the forecasts were specifically broken out between the city and the outside customers because these numbers were created to match the water assessment that was done for the city's general plan. And you can see what the totals are there down here. There's a whole series of slides here that in the PowerPoint version of this I was hiding. It's not because I'm hiding the information, but I thought that this is really background information that I wanted to just provide for you. I'm not going to go through this in all detail. I'd be happy to answer questions about it at some point if you want to talk about it. This is our current rates. This is some information that took the information off that table and converted it to our situation. And this is a little bit of okay, let's look backwards and see what we saw. So I'm not going to take a lot of time on this. We can certainly talk about it at any length as you'd like. Now I want to move to the Long-Term Conservation Master Plan. And I want to really sort of say this is a work in progress. There are, what I've done is I put a bunch of different things in this part of the presentation, the goal of which is to show you what the analytical tools are, not necessarily to say this is the answer and we're going to stick with this answer.
So could you quickly, as a professional, tell us how, when you look at this chart of the elasticity of price on water, in layperson's terms, what do you conclude is the impact or the potential impact of changing price?
Well, I think what this says, if you would take the table information here, and I've given you the source for this document, this table, and we have quite a number of our customers, as many of you know, who get uniform rates. So anybody who's not a single family or duplex customer gets a uniform rate where they pay $4 or $5.10 per 100. And then the increasing block rate for the single family. And what I did is I said, okay, well, let's take that and then let's apply that to our situation. So for single family, it would say that summer elasticity is sort of minus 0.55. So this would say if you raised rates 10%, that water demand would go down 5.5%. And winter elasticity is lower, which is not surprising. This is, again, more discretionary water that's typically used. In the all other customers group that are not receiving the price signal because every unit of water costs them the same, you get a little bit less price elasticity at in the summer, and you get a little bit less in the winter.
Thank you.
This would be the initial elasticity. Do you anticipate that over the course of a couple of years, people will become accustomed to the price increase, the impact would be much less on conservation? Just like when gasoline hit $3 a gallon, everybody was like, oh my God, I'm not going to drive anymore. And now we pay $4 a gallon, don't think twice about it.
Well, I think that the whole issue of elasticity is a really complicated thing, and we have not done any kind of long-term evaluation of anything here, so I can't really answer that question. I would say that, again, we're seeing a downward trend in demand, certainly on a per capita basis. That's being driven by some things, and again, this little exercise I did here talked about between 2004 and 2009, demand as measured by gross production fell by 9%, and we had sort of a total rate increase that was, without compounding, 82.5%, and with compounding was actually more than double. And if you calculate the price elasticity of demand based on either the 82.5%, you would say it's minus 0.11, or if you use this number, it's way low. That's substantially lower than the numbers that are on that chart. Right. And that makes the assumption that that weather is, or that price is what's driving all of this. And I don't know whether any of that's true. But I think that this is an issue that I think, especially given that we are looking at increasing prices over the coming, that we need to be understanding more about. Okay.
But I would add, just, I mean, quickly, not with an answer, but it wasn't obviously just the price changing. This was the same period when the city started public education around water use, and statewide at least, public information about drought. So I think we really would have to look into a lot further into it than just looking as if people's changed behavior was totally due to the change in the price of water. That might be the least reason people change their behavior. Who knows?
Right. So we're going to make a list of those types of questions. I took the microphone to just let you know that for reasons I don't understand, the only microphone that works for our foreigners, our buddy Doug, who's up at 3 o'clock in the morning so he can participate in this meeting from Italy, is this one. So you have to repeat the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
No.
So I guess the one other thing I want to say is for city customers who receive a combined utility bill, one other factor that I think is a little confounding is their price signal is muddied, if you will, by the sewer and the solid waste bill. For customers in the Live Oak area who we serve, and in Capitola that just get the water bill from us, it would be more interesting to look at specifically, drill down and look at their consumption and their pattern of usage. I think you would get a better sense of what the price elasticity of demand is if you sort of segregated, because I do think that most people, and again, from other experiences elsewhere in my career, most people look at the bottom line of the bill and they don't look at the individual, elements of the bill. So it's a little bit, the combined utility bill makes it a little bit hard to get that message, that price signal out in a clear way.
And again, an issue that we'll get into, but in the past, the city council was never willing to have water simply be a commodity, which we use the price as the only regulatory mechanism, because there's social justice issues and whether poor people can get any water under that model. So that's something we'll have to look into. What are the limits to that on some level?
Yeah. So Doug, that was about kind of city council policy historically, which I think this will be an issue going forward. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the master plan. Again, kind of recapping what we saw earlier in terms of the percent of the fixtures that are compliant with efficiency standards. And I'm sorry, the dishwashers aren't on this list, and I don't know why, but they're not. But it's recapping some information I provided earlier. There was the process that we've been through here is about looking at a variety of potential measures, screening those measures, finding that there were 39 remaining. This is a list of the 39 kind of categorized as you see them. And there's a lot more information. If you really want to dig into this, there's quite a lot of information on the Water Commission website for the February, for the March, for the April, and for the May meeting, so you can go to their agendas, and we're happy to get that stuff up onto the website if that's what you'd like. This shows the millions of gallons saved per year, 2030, and you can sort of see that they range from low to, that's 50 million gallons a year. To help with analysis, the options were packaged into the 4 packages. This is, again, you can't read this, but you have this in your packet. Describes which are the, which items went into each packet, sort of the amount of savings, the benefit cost analysis, and the sort of cost per million gallons saved is in this column. This is the graphic that shows, so 3.5 billion gallons going to 4 billion gallons without additional conservation. And then it shows the sort of deducts, if you will, of implementing the various programs. The plumbing code changes this green sort of line right here, and then the additional plans that are here. And you can sort of see that not only could you keep demand flat by implementing these conservation programs, you could actually reduce demand a little bit over this 20-year time frame. This is the GPCD table for the same information. Again, what I really wanted to show you here is not so much these are the answers, but to show you some of the analytical work that's just been done as an example of the kinds of results that you can get. One of the challenges we have right now is in calculating both the benefit cost ratio and the particularly the benefit cost ratio is the avoided cost number is kind of a plug number of $2,500 per million gallons saved, and we don't know how that compares with what the alternatives are. It's likely that the alternatives are potentially more expensive, and if they're more expensive, then from a benefit cost ratio, any of these projects would look better. Again, this is just analytical information. I'm not, I'm just showing you kind of how the information can be portrayed once we get a avoided cost number that we want to use in this analysis. And then, again, more information about that. And I think it ends pretty much the content of this presentation ends with this, which I thought was interesting. It compares the sort of utility costs and the public costs, customer costs of these various packages. And, I think that there are some big dollars on the customer side here, and I don't have that much experience with this kind of thing to know whether that's automatic or I can have looked historically to know whether or not those numbers are likely to be embraced. A lot in of these programs are based on either financial incentives or they're based on voluntary participation. There's nothing mandatory in any of these. So it means that people have to choose to participate or to take advantage of that, washing machine rebate when they need to replace their washer, et cetera. So getting down to the last sort of slide, really with respect to all the assumptions that you see, particularly in the future supply, future demand area, there's lots of opportunity to, argue and disagree about what the right numbers are and what the right assumptions should be. But, one of the inherent challenges of forecasting anything for the future is that you never can be absolutely sure that you've got the right answer. It's you have to make the best educated guess you can. Climate change introduces an irreducible uncertainty into our process. We're not going to resolve this uncertainty. We're going to have to figure out how to cope with it. Finally, I think scenario planning is a good, useful way to learn about and get a better handle on how the various factors we're dealing with in our planning could affect the future. So with that, I do have to thank a lot of people in the water department for not only putting up with the fact that I was doing this for a long time and not paying any attention to them, but also Heidi and Toby in particular, and Eileen and others who proofed this document to really help me, make sure that it was as accurate as we could make it, and there's still errors in it. So I apologize for the errors, but it was a team effort. Thank you.
Okay, this is the only mic we're going to use. That's what that meant. I don't want to hear from you. Far from it. And I did want to actually introduce. So if you're with the water department, would you mind, Heidi?
I forgot to mention Barry.
Yeah, well, all right, we'll start with Barry then. Barry?
Chris Barry.
Chris Barry. All right, hi, nice to meet you. Heidi? That's Heidi. And I'm having a, hey Toby. Thanks for your help on that one question. And for coming here. We appreciate it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand Nicholas this magical microphone, and he's going to read off Doug's other two questions, and then I'll give the microphone back to Rosemary.
Okay, we're channeling Doug.
Not unless you need
And the questions are, the first one is, I think it would have been instructive to show how current actual usage compares to the representational demand. Representational in quotes. It appears that folks have curtailed usage to reduce demand to be within our available supply. That is, no deficit. Do you want to deal with that one first?
Even if Rosemary can keep it in her brain, I don't think we can have two questions floating at one time at this hour. So Rosemary.
So I think that with respect to the 297 million gallon seasonal deficit that we saw in the fish flow graphs, which is really more, it's similar kind of hydrology and current demand as opposed to the representational, which is purposefully not a specific year. I think that we're seeing curtailment that can close that gap. So I think that that's the best answer to that question that I can give in this situation.
And then the second question, and Doug, if that wasn't a satisfactory answer yet, it just will have to happen in the next meeting. But here's your second question.
Okay, the next one from Doug. I also want to know more about how the usage survey was conducted and what we know about the characteristics of the surveyed accounts. Anecdotally, the penetration rates feel high to me and to other water folks from outside of Santa Cruz with whom I've spoken.
So what I'd like to suggest on that one is that we provide the committee with links and or documents that describe the result of that. So there's a report, there are PowerPoint presentations, and I think that, again, it was designed to be sort of statistically valid at the 95% rate, and the sample sizes were designed on that. And there were some challenges in getting the results in, but I think there's some information out there that I'm not, sort of totally conversant with. I think it would be good for us to just send information.
Okay, good. So here's, obviously, learning this information and absorbing it and discussing it and refining it is an important part of what you will do as a committee. It's also vital to the first step in developing your decision model, which is identifying what the problem is that you're trying to solve. And so we'll be talking about that today a little bit and tomorrow for sure. We've listed some of the questions that you've had, and if they don't yet include Doug's, but the nice thing is I have those in black and white so I can get them into the notes quite nicely. But if you had a question, you brought it up, and you don't see it on those flip chart sheets, would you make sure and correct that? Because I think it's important that we list those. But of course, you also want to take these reams of information home and have the opportunity to follow up with additional questions. And Peter will want to play with his spreadsheet and so on and so forth. Did he say he didn't have another question? Yeah, he will. I'm going to turn the microphone over to you in a second. What I'm wondering, generally speaking, how does this feel to you, aside from overwhelming, as a starting point for one of the things many of you said in the interviews that you wanted, which was to have some body of information that had been sifted through by all of you and that you generally agreed or could articulate how you disagreed? Is this a good starting point? Okay. So what I'm envisioning is that over the meetings, this thing would get matured by your questions and your ongoing dialogues. So I'm not saying that you would sit through another hour and 15-minute PowerPoint presentation, but maybe pieces could get individual attention. I also thought that the phone calls with a couple of committee members just kind of looking and saying, this is how that strikes me, were useful, and that it might be good to continue with those. So that's a proposal. Would you like to continue as a committee to work on making this PowerPoint a reflection of that body of knowledge where you agree and sometimes disagree? The question is, if you think this is a good starting point and the ending point is that you have something you could put on your website or use in a public meeting that shows things that you've beaten on and improved and gotten agreement about and the things that you don't agree about, is that a worthwhile task for you as a committee to take on?
Yes.
Rick had something to say.
Well, I think, at this point, we're receiving information, and, I didn't think we were going to go through this and approve of it, right? Right. Okay, so as far as, putting it on the website as a piece of information that the Water Department presented, I have no problem with that.
Oh, no, that's not the question. The question is, do you think this is worth working on to make it a more mature product that shows your areas of agreement and disagreement? David has something he wants.
If I understand the question correctly, you're asking us if this provides a framework that we would let that the components of could be fleshed out, altered, and refined as we come to conclusions or ranges of conclusions, but that this would provide the framework for managing the information and having it in a presentable form.
Yes. It could look completely different by the time you're finished with it. So, I'm going to do the yes, we want to take that on as a task or not. Walk through.
We have to decide right now.
Well, yeah, this is just a very information given to us and not exclusive of other things, sure, but it doesn't mean anything.
So forgive me, I don't seem to be able to frame the question very well. I'm not asking you to approve this. This is like a baby. Right, is it worth whipping it into shape?
You're asking us to use this information for future discussions, but I say yes, but not excluding others that might come in, which means this is just one part of what we will be talking about.
And not even this, but the evolution of this. That's the part I'm asking. Is it worth evolving this?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes. All right. I have to do this way, though, because we have Doug on the phone, so.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I want to say yes, and I just want to add, I think there's a lot of issues we have to debate, but there's none of them that won't fit somehow in this framework. We didn't leave out, though, so it's a good place to sort of start for hanging stuff and disagreeing.
But it doesn't mean anybody's going to come along later and say, no, you can't make another video, right? It's not exclusive, as Peter said.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think it's important. It's a good tool to have. I think ultimately we'll have to agree on what the problem is. And the problem will contain elements of all the things that were included in there today. And I think that if we can come to agreement as a group on all those elements individually, then that'll give both ourselves and the public kind of a focus for this process. So I think it'll be a great tool.
Thank you.
I accept.
Me too.
All good.
Thumbs up.
Yes.
Okay, so we have something to add to our points of agreement list. We're saying that the committee is taking on the evolution of this starter as one of their tasks. Is that fair? And this PowerPoint that Rosemary presented. So what that means is that you would expect to have some activity about this between meetings, and you would expect to have some sort of reporting about the evolution at the next meeting. But it also means that Rosemary might want to, or you may want to use some of Stratus's skills, and according to your agreement about Stratus, you have to agree and scope what he's going to do. So this is our first opportunity to do this. Is it acceptable if Bob Rauscher contributes to answering some of the questions that you've asked and to improving the slideshow for the next time that you see it?
Especially on climate change stuff.
Especially on climate change stuff. So are there any, can we just say, can I just ask, are there any no's?
It's supposed to be,
A yes? Okay.
it's supposed to be poll. It's supposed to go around and poll everyone.
Yes.
And so could you check and make sure Doug's online?
Yes.
with all this?
Yes.
Yes.
No, I wasn't really clear what the question was.
Is it okay if Rauscher helps on the next iteration?
Do we know how we want to have it changed? I mean, are we going to go direction?
I believe that the next step is to articulate what the questions are that he's supposed to help with.
Do you want me to read what
Yes.
Doug said?
Sure.
It establishes a framework. It needs significant work in many, if not most, of the details before it can represent the work or the sense of the committee. However.
I think people are in agreement on that. Thanks, Doug.
Yes.
Heck yeah. But this, I understand, is our only alternative, right? So yes.
Yes.
All right, so we're on with Rauscher, and now what we need to do, oh, Rosemary has a point?
So one of one of the ways that this presentation was framed was to provide information for the recon phase. And I just want to make it clear that I'm open to making any kind of changes, but I think that the goal ought to be for the changes to fit into the real deal phase, not for us to like lose track of what we're doing in this phase and try to fine tune all this stuff, but to really say the product that the time frame for the maturation of this baby is when we start the real deal.
That's a really good point. Let me do a couple housekeeping things. Did we add Rauscher onto that? I think you could just add it to point number 3 if you liked.
And what?
That it's okay for Rauscher to participate in answering the questions.
So with Rauscher's help.
With Rauscher's help. Thank you. So that's one thing. The next thing is that we're not clear about what all the questions are. And then I just wanted to reinforce what Rosemary was saying. So Nicholas, as we go through the notes and augment them about what the questions were, what I would like to do is at least think a little bit about whether these are questions for the real deal, which gives several months to work out, or whether they're questions that have to be answered for recon. So Peter's actually been waiting the longest. He had several questions. Just one.
Just a clarification from Rosemary. The long-term water conservation master plan, is that a ready plan we are implementing now? Or it's because it looks like that's the solution, right? I mean, it's done. Or what's the status of that?
So the long-term conservation master plan was worked on by the Water Commission over the several months, starting in February, and the last action time it was on the Water Commission's agenda was in May. The Water Commission asked to have the tech memo created for the plan and to have that brought back. That's probably not being brought back to the Water Commission until the end of August. So it's a lot of work has been done. There's modeling workshops that Susie O'Hara's been working on trying to set up to allow people to understand how the modeling analysis was done. So it's a very developed product, but it's not to the recommendation stage yet, and there's lots of opportunity for additional input and discussions about it.
This is parallel to what we are doing now?
The work was intended to do a couple of things. One is to have time in a different setting where they could do some serious vetting. And there was a lot of time spent on this over the last several months so that could be not only the Water Commission could have a thorough discussion, but the public could engage in that. So a number of the settings of the sessions have been workshop kind of formatted. So it is running in parallel. But the intent was always, and the understanding was always, that this product would come over in and engage in this process. And if you all think that it needs to be tweaked a little here or there, that's certainly going to be on the table.
Okay, Mike Rotkin had a question.
It's actually more of a comment, but I'm trying to figure out, you made the point that we're not going to resolve each of the issues in the recon phase of this because a lot of that would be worked out in the real deal. But it seems to me that the recon phase is exactly where we ought to have on the table almost all, if not all, but almost all the questions that we'll want to like get into when we get to the final phase, right? So, like for example, when Rick, raised a couple questions here early, they need to be put in a list. Other people, as we keep going, will have more and more of these questions, and at some point we'll have to have. Some of them will require actual research from the consultants or others. Others will require a discussion in which we share values or whatever. But that's where it's going, right?
Absolutely, and we even have a very small piece of paper, which will surely have other things attached to it, where we want to be capturing research questions at every phase of recon. That's really the point of recon. It can do two things. It can surface the questions, which you will describe so they get really answered, but it also will let you prioritize the questions.
This is about, a question about the water conservation plan. So it's my impression that, just from looking at the numbers, that the master conservation plan is mostly conservation measures that affect indoor water use, and that outdoor water use is relatively small percentage of the savings. And I just want confirmation, maybe some numbers from the water department if that's so. And then as a follow-up to that, so what would the water department recommend be measures that could affect outdoor water use? Because summertime water use is something that is really driving our search for a supplemental water supply. It's not our winter water use, it's our summer water use. So if we can get a handle on that, then we're going in the right direction. So what would be the recommendation? And also, what would the water department think about a tiered pricing for non-residential users? Because right now, if you're in a residence, you pay a tiered rate. So the more water you use, you pay at the higher tier. That's only for residential customers. So all the rest of the customer classes pay at the Block 2 rate, which is the same as what residential customers are told is basically for indoor water use. As we get a higher usage and it goes to landscaping, irrigation, that's Block 3, and then Block 4, and so on. So in effect, non-residential customers, such as golf courses or designated landscape accounts, are paying less for landscape water than homes are, which I don't think strikes people as real fair. So what would be the recommendation on that? And then thirdly, we've been talking water neutral development for a while. What would the water department recommend in terms of a developer fee that would go towards offsetting the demand of a new project? And this has been employed in the Soquel Creek Water District since 2003. So it's tried and tested. In fact, they're learning more about it when they're making some recommended changes to it to make it more effective. But it's a way that we can kind of have some security that the kind of development that that reasonable development that can go on in our community will not push water demand ever higher, which erodes our water security. So that is the question.
All right, and we're not answering questions right now because then we won't get home till 11. But we're listing the questions. So the three were basically tell us more about peak demand. recommendations for dealing with peak demand and this tier 3 to, that included the tiered piece. I think there were really 4 questions. And then there was the part that you most recently, water neutral development. Now, Nicholas, if you could please note that a lot of those are alternatives issues, which is fine, and getting them on the table is fantastic. But part of what we also want to do tonight is start to get clear about goal problems versus solutions. And so this presentation was a lot about how can we define what the problem is that's being solved. And some of what you were saying is, how can we solve the problem?
It gets to be very fuzzy because in the presentation today, maybe you didn't notice, but there was an assumption made that the master conservation plan, the savings that would result for that, would offset growth. Now that's an assumption that I would like to change, because if we can devote the savings from these conservation programs to reduce our baseline demand, that means we're in a better position vis-a-vis drought. And then with the philosophy that growth pays for growth, which the city once subscribed to, hang on, the city once subscribed to that when it developed its developer fee. If we really subscribe to that, then we would actually have developers pay for growth.
Yes. So these issues need to be on the table. Anybody else have a question? These are the questions that would help evolve the PowerPoint.
So I want to clarify Rick's question by asking a question about the chart. I'm back on the presentation on page, they're not numbered, 82 and 83, which is a long list of the potential water conservation measures. And Rick started off by saying that the residential stuff is mainly indoors, which it is on this list. There are a number of things under landscape, which is a different kind of customer class, but many of the things listed under landscaping, I assume, are applicable to residential landscaping issues, even though it's a residential account. And I assume that there's interest in those things. Am I correct in those? I'm asking, when this chart was developed, does it, as Rick's assumption by looking at this was that there's no water saving ideas in the residential section because they're not listed under, no outdoor water saving ideas in residential because they're not listed under residential. Is he correct?
I apologize that the page numbers are so erratic in this thing. It's so irritating. But page 82 and 83. On page 83 is a whole series of landscaping measures. If you can see move to the right, you'll see the customer class that they are targeted to.
So these terms on the left-hand side are not about the customer categories, they're just descriptive. There's I don't know.
Could I interrupt? What I would like you to do, Mike, is say, hey, at the next meeting, could you clarify this page? Let's not solve it now, okay?
Then I have another comment. So this is only, not to get into early fights, and they'll be comradely, I suppose is the way to describe them or something. But when Rick says people are unhappy with the idea that landscapers pay a flat fee, that they don't pay the rates that are going to the residential customers, my perception, at least in the past, is that people understand that you would drive every farmer on the North Coast out of business if you charge them rates. We wouldn't have any agriculture in the north part of the county if we charge those rates. So I'm not so clear on that assumption that, some people don't understand why some landscaping water, the city might, as a public policy, think that water should be cheaper than the water that people use to put flowers in their backyard or something. That's just one example. I won't go into furthers, but at least I think we need some balance in that question on some level.
Okay, so what I would like to propose is, like all of our deadlines, they aren't real because this is an iterative process, so I'm not saying this would be your last chance. But would it be fair to ask you to look at this over the next week and send Rosemary questions, clarifications, issues, and then she can have a chance? Because the reason I'm saying a week is to get you the packet a week ahead of time. That leaves us a teeny window to actually do the work. So we don't need to come to consensus about this, but what I'm proposing is that your workload is that you're going to go over this in detail. You can work in groups or not, and you will send Rosemary your list of questions by close of business next Thursday, and then she and Rauscher and others will work on improvements, and then those will be topics of discussion at the next time. Okay? David?
We can only work in groups to the extent that it's less than a majority of the group.
Yeah, no quorums, okay. So, and speaking of quorums, we could have, I'm told that a conference call does not constitute a Brown Act infringement, so we could just have an informal conference call similar to what happened in the last month. You could form a temporary subcommittee that would be smaller than the quorum to participate in an ongoing way for less than 6 months in helping improve this baseline information.
And people just really need to understand this, but that means you can't leave that call and go talk to anybody else on the committee about what happened on the call. Otherwise you do have a Brown Act problem.
Yes. So, what would you like to do? How would you like to be involved?
I'd like to wait and get Rauscher on board and have him review this process with Rosemary and talk about how best to structure it, because we've agreed to use that report as a framework, but I think we have very much consensus that the information within that framework needs to be refined, and we need to all be comfortable that it's the right information to be used. And that's something that I would think that the people at the Water Department, Rauscher, Rosemary, could come up with a good way for us to do that and how we might examine different areas.
So you don't want to do anything as formal as creating a subcommittee? Not today. Would you like to, okay, anything ad hoc? No.
Well, your suggestion Nothing prohibits fewer than a quorum of people meeting informally ad hoc and so forth, rather than us establish it. I mean, I think people will do it if they think it will be helpful for them.
Right. Like what Mike said. Okay, good. Oh.
For me, it's extraordinarily difficult for me to arrange a significant amount of time in the next week to formulate meaningful questions about this package of information. I trust that should it be a month, I can still submit questions. This is an ongoing process.
It absolutely is. This will be iterative, and if you look at the Gantt chart, if you can open the Gantt chart, you'll see that it's like a bouncing ball. It will come back at each committee meeting.
So if I understand that correctly, the questions that Rosemary and her team will be able to respond to by our next meeting will be those she receives in the next week. Would that be a fair statement?
Sounds practical.
Actually, y'all can have till Monday the 7th.
I'm going to just take a second to belabor the obvious. We have to, in our next meeting, find a way for the microphone system to be fixed because it's slowing us down about 50%.
Okay. So, thank you all. That was a good discussion, and we have a path forward. Tomorrow, when we talk about scenarios, this will come back because scenarios or goals, depending how you want to structure your decision approach. For recon, you're going to have to do something. It could be what Peter describes as pick a number and give it a big shoulder, or it could be something slightly more sophisticated. But the whole point of recon is to not sweat it too much, but to keep moving forward, because you're more trying to put together a structure and test it, and you'll get to the real deal. So what's on your schedule now is the decision modeling game, the serious game, as Nicholas was sure that you would know. And this one will allow you to get up and to talk and to get a little bit of a brain break. I'm wondering about the composition of the participants in the game. Does anybody have any thoughts about that? I know, that's why I asked it that way. What I was thinking is that it might be fun, the audience people are also have been sitting here observing stuff, and it might be fun for you to participate. So the way that would work is, first of all, you would raise your hand and tell me whether you would like to participate in this game/exercise that will get at what the elements of a decision are. If you do, raise your hand. So you would be participating with the committee members. No, you don't want to. Well, that's interesting. Okay. So then so we'll just do tables. So this table, and that table, and I'm going to hand out the instructions in a second. If you could maybe come around so you can talk to each other.
Sid, you get to pick.
Do you want this section taped that they're doing now, or is this just an in-house? And then they're going to come with the.
There may be, there'll be people will be putting stuff up on the wall. There'll be, I think they use that chart. So there'll be stuff.
There will be stuff.
Yeah.
But they're not using a microphone, though, are they?
Oh, I see. No, the one they, well,
But I mean, after this brain session, then what happens?
this one will go for about half an hour. And then we start.
Because there's nothing really to record until they come back.
I wonder if we could just turn the camera.
And then when they come back,
For the answer, yes, then we'll tell you.